Hey guys, welcome to Capturing Christianity. I'm here today with Jimmy Akin. Tyler McNabb will be joining us a little bit later, but we're talking about lying today, something we haven't talked about on the channel yet. And it's apparent. I mean, it gets talked about every now and then in this in the apologetic sphere. Like, is lying always bad? Are there any circumstances under which it could be morally justified to lie? And say cases of if you were to be in Nazi Germany during World War II and Nazis came on your knocking at your door and you were hiding Jews in your basement, would you be obligated to tell them that they were there and that they had to come in and then they would kill them and then kill you or send you to concentration camp? Like, what would be the consequences of that? And then how does that actually bear on the morality of lying itself? That's a very poignant example that's brought up in a lot of cases, and people fall on both sides of this. And Jimmy, I'm going to rely on your expertise in this area because you've done a lot of study here on this whole topic, and you've got some really interesting insights. But your views on this, as I understand it, are also peculiar is the wrong term. Mm-hmm. Idiosyncratic might also be the wrong term, but you've got some unique views. So we'll put it that way. Mm-hmm. But
sure.
Yeah. Feel free to.
Yeah. So there are different theories of lying, and one common theory that goes back, for example, to St. Thomas Aquinas is that lying is a fundamental abuse of the faculty of speech. And so the faculty of speech on this understanding is to communicate known truth. And so you're doing something fundamentally unnatural by lying, and therefore it is always, always, always wrong. And so you could not use lying in the case of the Nazis at the door. That doesn't mean you got to tell them the truth. Yes, I have Jews in my attic. You could simply remain silent and shut the door in their face. But if you go beyond, which, the way this scenario is typically set up, that's not going to save the Jews. They're just going to demand, they're going to burst in and demand to search your place unless you lie to them. Some people have proposed.
I was going to say, you could say something like, instead of lying, you could be like, well, search the place, if you find someone, then let me know, and that would be, you would sort of be avoiding the question. You wouldn't necessarily commit yourself to saying that no one is there. You could be like, hey, look around, see if you can find anyone. That might be one option, but then again, like that's going to be very risky. I mean, you could also adjust the example to be like, if they were to search, they would find someone. And so you can kind of limit it in such a way, like this is supposed to be a hypothetical example. It's rooted in history, so that makes it kind of more poignant, but you can warp the example to avoid a lot of these different responses. So that way you would have to be sort of forced in a position of lying to save the lives of these other people. We could also make it like, we could also adjust the example to make it even worse. So like, if they were to find Jews there, then they would have, I don't know, killed 12 million people, something like that. If they found Jews in your basement, then they would have killed an additional 12 million people just because they found that, and when you adjust it in those ways, it's like, I don't know. It's kind of tough.
Yeah. Well, part of it is going to depend on what lying actually is. Now, some people would draw a distinction between deception and lying, and they would say, okay, lying is when you use words to achieve the effect of deception. And you could do things other than use words to try to deceive the Nazis. Like, for example, they come to your door, they say, do you know where any Jews are? Instead of just shutting the door in their face, you could like sigh, and roll your eyes and shut the door, and to try to throw them off. But making it sound like you're just tired of this question rather than so you're giving them a non-relevant thing to mislead them. My problem with that is, I don't care whether it's in words or in actions. You're still deceiving them. And for me, the real issue is deception. It's not how are you deceiving them, whether you're using words or some other means of deception. And actually, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, there's some traction for that view. In one of the paragraphs that discusses it, it says that to lie is to use words or actions to deceive another person. And so I don't view mental reservations where you say something, but it has a different meaning than what they're going to take it as, or actions like rolling your eyes and sighing. To me, that's just other forms of deception. And the real key here for me is, can you deceive someone else? There are other theories of lying besides the Thomistic one, though. Some theologians have proposed that you can't lie when a person has the right to know something. And so the question then becomes, does this person have the right to know this? And you can say, well, okay, in a court, if a finding of fact is, being tried, the court has the right to know what the facts are. So you can't lie in court. But maybe the Nazis at the door don't have the right to know whether or not you've got Jews in your attic, and therefore you could lie to them in that circumstance. I've also heard another theory that it's okay to lie to people who are not moral agents. So if someone's below the age of reason, for example, or they're in the grip of in the thrall of some irrational thought process or ideology, like maybe the Nazis are, then it's okay to lie to them. Those are interesting, but as alternatives that are a little more practical. But I have my own view. I have my own theory of lying that I developed. I haven't published on it yet. I've been told I need to, and I should at some point. I haven't done that yet, but I'd be happy to describe it. I think that there are a couple of competing sets of intuitions that we have that need to be balanced in this area. One of them is we have the intuition that it's okay in some circumstances to lie, for example, to save human lives, to protect the lives of the Jews that you're hiding, or to protect the lives of the hostages that the Nazis might otherwise kill in even larger numbers. On the other hand, there are some lies that we have scriptural evidence for that can never be told, like we can never deny our Christian faith. And so we can never lie and say, no, I'm not a Christian. If we do that, we're told, that'll damn us. We need to be honest about our Christian identity. We need to be willing to put our own lives on the line for that if we're called upon to do so. And so I think any successful theory of lying is going to find a way to incorporate both of those elements. There are some lies that can never be told, but then there are other lies that can be told. And so to me, a successful theory of lying needs to incorporate both of those.
Something else that has occurred to me in this context is like going back to the 10 Commandments. Let me go ahead and just pull it up here. It's found in Exodus 20, for those of you that don't know where it is actually in the Bible. Exodus
also
20.
Deuteronomy 5.
Yes. But I wanted to just put it up on the screen here so you can actually see what it says in terms, like the commandment to not lie actually says, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor."
And that's more
Jimmy,
restricted. That's more restricted than what people realize. That's not a general prohibition on lying. That's a prohibition on false testimony in court. That's why it's, you shall not bear false witness. The idea is you're in ancient Israel, you're at a trial. These were typically conducted at the city gates with the elders of the city in passing judgment. And if you were to lie about your neighbor in that situation, you're lying in a court setting. So this is technically, exegetically, this is a prohibition on false court testimony, but it contains a broader principle against deception that has a broader application.
Yeah, I think that's right. And then obviously, like going back to the New Testament, the sort of summary of the law is that you've got to love God and love other people. And so if whatever you're doing when you are lying, you're trying to justify it some way, that's still got to be consistent with loving God and loving your neighbor, loving other people. And so, but that's ultimately the whole purpose of it. But I just kind of wanted to point out that the actual commandment here it's not just like, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not lie. It doesn't actually say that. It says you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, which, as you pointed out, could be the context here could be sort of in like a court case. You could also interpret it like against your friend or someone who is sort of you're in a positive relationship with. Don't bear false witness against them.
I tend to go a little broader on that. One's neighbor, you may not like your neighbor, but you're not supposed to lie against him in court.
Yeah. Yeah, but that was the ultimate point. Is that the
Mhm.
actual wording here is interesting and different. But yeah, so I wanted to bring that up, and then maybe we can talk about so when we're trying to like analyze these extreme scenarios, like going back to the example of hiding the Jews from the Nazis, um, is it what is your view on that situation? Would it be okay to lie, or would
Mhm.
you take a different view?
Heck yes. Heck yes. I'm in favor of lying to save human lives from the Nazis. Absolutely.
So what is
Um,
the cutoff?
mhm.
So there's a different. I mean, that's one of the things that's brought up in this literature as well. Is like, you, if you accept that it's okay to lie in some cases, then it starts to. I guess one question that sort of arises is, when is it okay? In what circumstances? Like, at what point does it become okay to start lying to people?
Mhm.
If you've got some sort of justification, that's the sort of underlying principle that would make it okay. But then when you actually get to particulars and you get some particular case, so like going to this Nazi example, if you had one person in there, would that be okay? Or say that they were just wanting some information from you, and you weren't, actually hiding Jews, and they were just asking you, do you know of anyone that is hiding Jews? And so you could, in that situation, if you gave them information, it wouldn't necessarily lead, because the other person that maybe is hiding them could just lie to them in that case. But at what point, what sort of situation do we have to be in which
Mhm.
we find a justifying reason to lie?
So this gets to my view, and basically, I began reasoning a number of years ago this way. I said, okay, I can imagine a scenario where um, I need to use lethal force to save a life. This would be a case of proxy self defense. Let's suppose the Nazis come to my door and they say, "Do you have any Jews in the attic?" And I do. I've got a whole Jewish family, so their lives outweigh the lives of the, let's say, two Nazis at my door. I would be legitimate in this circumstance if I could get away with it in shooting both Nazis in the head, killing them, and then disposing of the bodies. So they just vanish, and the Nazis don't know where they vanished, and so they have no reason to suspect me, and thus they're not going to track me down and find the Jews in my attic. So I could use lethal force to solve this problem if I can get away with it. You can always adjust the experiment to where I can't get away with it. But in the base experiment itself, which we're using to bring out our moral intuitions, yeah, I could use lethal force. I could just kill these Nazis and dispose of the body. Well, it seems obvious that just lying to these Nazis is less extreme than killing them. And we ought to be, it therefore ought to be reasonable to just lie to them. So, what could account for that? And basically, I decided it looks to me like what we're doing when we lie to someone, when we deceive someone, whether it's in words or not, is we're doing a form of damage to them. We're specifically damaging their belief system by introducing false beliefs into their belief system. And so this is what philosophically you could call doxastic damage. And I therefore think about, is it okay to lie to someone in terms of, would it be morally legitimate to otherwise damage someone in a situation, or will by deception I be minimizing the damage that will be
Hmm.
done because if I can do less damage to someone in order to solve a problem, I want to do less damage. I don't want to do excessive damage. And but if it's legitimate to do damage to someone, like it is in the case of proxy self-defense, using lethal force to save human life, well, that's legitimate. And so lying, therefore, would also be legitimate in that same situation. So I would say that when you're lying to save human life, you're doing less actual damage to someone than if you killed them, and
Hmm.
therefore lying would be justified in that situation. That would not mean that lying or deception is justified in all situations, just like it does not mean that doing damage to someone physically is justified in all situations. There are situations where punching someone in the nose, even though that's non lethal, is something you shouldn't do.
Mm.
You shouldn't do damage to someone physically. Also, there are certain types of damage that are intrinsically immoral that you can never do. You can never, for example, kill an innocent person. Killing an innocent person is intrinsically evil, and so you can never kill an innocent person. And in the same way, there are some lies that you can never tell, like I am not a Christian. That goes to an issue that is so fundamental to people's belief systems that you can never lie about that. And so that's how I try to handle um, situations where lying is impermissible, either because it's not justified by the circumstances, or in some cases, a lie can never be told because of the nature of the material it covers. But in other cases, I think that thinking of this in terms of, well, could I do physical damage to someone to solve this problem? If the answer is yes, then I could do the lesser doxastic damage of just deceiving them.
Sorry, I was smiling a little bit because
Uh-huh.
when you said I'm not a Christian, I was thinking of someone like taking that clip out and like posting it as like a
Did I
standalone
say
video.
that?
Just you said I am not a Christian, but you said it in terms like you said those words, but you had like
Okay.
something before and after. Yeah, but
Okay. Well,
I was just thinking about
I
how people can
very
just be
much
super
am a Christian.
dishonest or deceiving.
I couldn't lie and say I'm not a Christian.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so maybe what do you think about this? It almost sounds like the reasoning that you're using is like we're picking the lesser evil. So like we're doing damage in the case of causing what did you say?
Bodily injury or physical injury. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So bodily injury, physical injury. I think you would probably also agree that you could put it in terms of like mental injury. So like if someone would be very mentally damaged by receiving like the truth from you, and it was like very harmful for that person, and it could lead to years of say mental anguish, for depression and everything. And in that case, so maybe this way. So like, is it okay to lie to a pregnant woman who asks, how do I look?
Yeah.
Something like that might be a little bit
I would say
more
sure.
controversial.
If you know that, so we have different kinds of damage involved here. The deception involves doxastic damage or damage to someone's belief system, but that can have collateral effects in terms of other forms of damage, like emotional damage. And so, if I were to tell a woman, whether pregnant or not, the truth that she looks terrible the way she's arranged herself at the moment, that could do an excess amount of emotional damage to her. And the same thing for a guy. It doesn't have to be a woman, but women are the classic example in this reason in this area. If telling them the truth would do outsized emotional damage, then I could do less doxastic damage and give them a face-saving lie and say, "Oh, you look fine." And that's not a huge amount of doxastic damage, especially because I'm not committing to too much. Fine does not mean you look stunningly gorgeous. It just means you're okay. Don't worry about it. And even if that's wrong, even if that is deception, it's a minor amount of doxastic damage in order to avoid doing a large amount of emotional damage. And so I think my theory will cover what we consider white lies, little white lies. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So white lies, would you go into a confessional and tell the priest that you've committed a whole bunch of white lies, but they were justified? Would you even mention them, or would you just, given your theory, would you just be like, it wouldn't even come to mind?
I wouldn't mention them, because what we're required to confess from a Catholic point of view is mortal sins that we've committed. And if I've told a little white lie in order to spare someone massive emotional damage, that's I would say that's not a sin at all. In fact, I would argue I've done a praiseworthy thing by enabling the person to function without massive emotional damage by doing a tiny amount of doxastic damage. A parallel might be, let's suppose you've got a person who's dislocated their arm. It's out of joint. And so they come to you and you're a doctor or someone who's experienced with first aid, and you realize, I need to yank this arm back into its socket. Okay, that's going to hurt, but you're sparing them much worse physical pain by giving them a tiny amount, or comparatively smaller amount of physical pain, by jerking their arm back into the socket. Well, okay, you did cause them some physical pain when you jerked their arm back into the socket, but that was praiseworthy of you to do. You spared them much greater pain, and not just physical pain, but also they can't use their arm when it's out of joint. So you
Mhm.
restored the function of their arm. You wouldn't need to go confess that at all. Otherwise, every doctor and paramedic and nurse would need to be confessing all the time, because they do inflict some forms of physical damage on people in order to make them better overall. And telling a white lie to someone would fall into the same category.
And that's literally what surgeons do, is they cut stuff out of your
Oh,
body to,
yep.
and that causes damage, but it's supposed to, in the long run, help. Okay, so one other thing that occurred to me is, as a father, sometimes you want to encourage your kids to be the best that they possibly can, and part of
Mhm.
what's involved there is giving them confidence. And so
Mhm.
sometimes if they're engaged in some sort of activity, like say that your son or daughter plays soccer, okay, and you see them on the field and they're like, hey, how did I do today? And you're like, you have a couple options. You could be very honest and be like, hey, you did horrible today, like you need to get way better. Or you could go a different route, and it could be classified as a lie and tell them that they did sort of better than you actually thought. But the purpose of that would be, a loving father at least would say the purpose of that would be to encourage them and sort of build their confidence so that they could match that level and be confident the next time that they go out on the field. And that doesn't necessarily involve damage, right? You're not damaging them in some way, or you're not avoiding damage. You're trying to encourage some sort of positive effect. So that's the trade-off. So the trade-off would be you're giving them a false belief, maybe a false confidence, which can actually have this sort of positive effect, as opposed to avoiding some sort of negative effect. So it could be that there's sort of lesser of two evils approach, but then there are maybe other circumstances in which you would lie in that case, or tell a white lie, so that you could encourage some sort of positive outcome.
Yeah, my system incorporates that as well. I would say you are doing some doxastic damage to them by giving them a false belief, but the goal may not be avoiding worse damage. The goal may be to give them some improvement, due to their confidence. And my theory would incorporate that like this. One of the things that parents do for their small children is get them vaccinated. Now, I know some people have concerns about particular vaccines, but let's just assume for the moment that some vaccines will spare children, on balance, the risk of getting horrible diseases like, I don't know, measles, mumps, rubella, or some other vaccine that small children take. Well, at least when I was a kid, the way you got vaccines was they stuck a needle in your arm. That hurts, especially if you're a small child who doesn't understand what's going on with this vaccine, and all you know is you're in this strange place, it smells funny, there are these strangers, and your parents who you love and who love you and are supposed to take care of you are suddenly letting strangers hold you down and stick a needle in your arm, and you wail your head off. Well,
Yeah.
okay, you've got physical pain from the needle, you've got emotional pain from the situation, but the purpose of this is to supercharge your immune system so that you have a new superpower. You're not going to be as vulnerable to these diseases. So in this situation, you are causing small amounts of physical evil to the child in order to avoid, or in order to promote, a good that will have benefits later on because they're going to be immune to these diseases. So
There
that
was
would be analogous to telling a kid something that's not strictly true in order to build their confidence so they can actually perform better.
Yeah, no, I was thinking of a similar example with doctors and nurses and stuff, and how they'll sometimes. Well, I think there was actually studies on this where, I mean, first of all, for people who are dealing with anxiety and stuff, if you just like give them, well, let me be more specific, for people that deal with like health anxiety, if you just give them like a diagnosis, like a name of something they might actually have, that can go a really long way in terms of like helping them and stuff. So there's a couple ways that you could go with that. In this context, you could lie and give someone a diagnosis. You could literally make up a name for something, and that might give them some sort of temporary relief. But in other cases,
they already
like
have
something,
names. They already have names for things like that in medicine.
oh, what are
If
they?
Well, it depends, but let's say someone has a skin problem, and or and the doctor doesn't know what causes it.
Hmm.
They could say, "Oh, you have idiopathic dermatitis." Idiopathic means we don't know what causes it. Dermatitis means it's something wrong with your skin. So
Hmm.
just based on whatever symptomology you present, they can say, "Oh, you have idiopathic," and then name the symptom.
Yeah, and that could give a quite a bit of relief. But in other cases, like I think that there are studies on this, and
Mhm.
I'd have to dig into the literature on this, and I just haven't because it's not very relevant to what I study on a daily basis. But like so, people that are dealing with cancer or some other sort of like terminal illness, if they believe that they can survive and get better, they
Mhm.
have a much better chance of surviving.
Yep.
And that's I think, again, I think that's true. It bears out in the medical literature and
A-
stuff. But
And this is
the question would sort of be, would it be okay to just lie to people and tell them, hey, you got a
Mhm.
much better chance of surviving than, giving them just the straight data? Like, okay, you've got stage 4 cancer, you've got 3 months to live. Instead, you could be like, hey, you've got stage 2 cancer, and you could live a much longer time if we start treatment now.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts there?
Okay, so here we're getting into an area of medical ethics that's concerned with what's known as the placebo effect. Placebo is Latin for "I will please," and the idea is, as the medical professional, you're going to tell the patient something that will please them and encourage them to survive or heal or get better in some way. And there is a demonstrable effect that's connected with placebos where people will get better. They will report,
Hmm.
yeah, I've got less pain than I used to, or they'll say, or they'll seem to physically get better. There's actually a debate in parapsychology about to what extent is the placebo effect just using psychic healing on yourself. But whatever causes it, it's a real effect. And there are ethical considerations involved that medical professionals have thought about. For example, kind of the classic version of the placebo effect that you hear about is your doctor gives you a sugar pill and says, take this pill and twice a day and tell me how you're doing in a week. You should feel much better. Okay, the thing is, you can't really go to a pharmacy and get sugar pills. They don't keep them in stock. Um, so what do pharmacies and doctors actually do when a doctor is giving you a placebo? Well, what they'll do is the doctor will give you a prescription for a subtherapeutic dose of an actual medicine that does have real effects in other people, just not for what he's treating you for. And he'll give you this tiny amount. It's just a very small amount. It's subtherapeutic, so it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to help you. But he gives you this very low dosage prescription. And then you go to your pharmacist to fill the prescription. And the pharmacist looks at the paper and realizes this is a subtherapeutic dose. This is not going to do anything, and not from its own intrinsic medical qualities. And so that
Hmm.
tells the pharmacist, I'm holding a prescription for a placebo. So how does the pharmacist handle this in filling the prescription? A common way that pharmacists use is they will say something like, this medicine has a variety of uses, but your doctor has determined that it may help you get better with your condition. And that covers, he's not being dishonest. Your doctor has determined this may help you. So
Hmm.
he's accurately representing the effect of the placebo, but he's not claiming that this is going to have a general benefit for everybody in other, that he's trying not to misrepresent its known therapeutic benefits. And so that's a common way that they handle that, to try to essentially they're using mental reservations. There is a version of deception here, but they're trying not to say anything absolutely false. On the other hand, there have been more recent studies that say, you know what? Even if the person knows it's a placebo, it helps. And so there's reason to question, do you actually need to deceive the patient about the placebo you're giving them? Because there have been other studies where the doctors are frank and say, this is a placebo. It doesn't have any medical benefit, but I think it'll help you. So go ahead and take it and tell me how you feel in 2 weeks. And people still feel better, even knowing that what they're getting is a placebo.
But I mean, in still kind of going back to your original theory, like it would be very justified in the case that I laid out earlier about someone possibly dying of cancer very soon, and if you give them wrong information about the likelihood of their or the what is the term? How long they have left? What is the term for
their
that?
prognosis.
Their prognosis. Yeah, if you alter the actual prognosis that you give to them, and that could extend their life thereby, seems like under your theory that would obviously be morally permissible.
Well,
or it could be.
Potentially. I think it depends on how you do it, because I think people have a right to know. So this would be, again, getting us into territory of lies that cannot be told. Back in the day, there were situations where, like in the Victorian age, and even into the mid 20th century, there were situations where someone was going to die, and the doctor and the family thought death was such a horrible thought that we shouldn't tell them they're dying. And I would say, absolutely not. If this person's going to be ushered into eternity soon, they have a right to know that, so they can make whatever peace they need to make with God. And so I would say you can't lie to someone about the fact you think they're going to die. But I would say you could tell someone, it doesn't look good. You've got stage 4 cancer. This is what your normal prognosis would be. But I think you can do better than that if you engage and, take this use this therapy or whatever it may be, and encourage them to exceed the prognosis. But if you foresee that they're actually going to die, you need to tell them that.
So you would have, in your case, it almost sounds like you've got a defeater for the justification. So like you would attempt to justify it by saying, well, this is going to extend their life. And then you've got a defeater by saying, no, actually you need to tell the person the truth about their mortality and whether or not they're going to die very soon, because there's a very big implications for that. They've got to be ready.
Yeah, I would say I'm trying to find a balance between the two things. I want honesty so that they know what may happen, so they can make their preparations. But if they can extend their life by doing some particular thing, then I also want to encourage them to do that.
Well, I guess in the example that I gave is that the way to extend their life would be to give them more confidence.
Yeah.
And
even
more
if
certainty that they're going to survive.
Even if the way to help them extend their life is a placebo, I would say that placebo can be justified even though it involves deception, but it needs to be within a framework where they understand the overall reality of their situation.
Okay. What other areas have we not covered yet as it relates to lying?
Well, we haven't
deception?
covered the nocebo effect.
Okay.
So nocere is Latin for I will harm, and so nocebo means I will harm. And the nocebo effect is the opposite of the placebo effect. So, for example, if it's a placebo, if you're about to get a shot and the nurse tells you, no, this won't hurt a bit, that's an attempt to make it hurt less than it actually will. But if the nurse comes up to you and says, oh, I'm afraid this is going to hurt a lot, that's the nocebo effect. She's making it going to feel worse than it would have originally. And just like the placebo effect is real, the nocebo effect is also real. So you can use psychology to hurt someone, including physically. And it's a little harder to do ethical studies on the nocebo effect. It's harder to get it past an institutional review board of, we're going to hurt these people to find out how hurting people works. But there have been studies done on the nocebo effect, and nocebos have a long history in the human experience. One of the things that is reported just all over the globe in all kinds of different cultures is psychic attack, where you put a curse on someone or you put the evil eye on someone, and they get harmed. And in some cases, people will actually die. But there are indications that in order for various forms of psychic attack to work, the person has to know that the technique is being used on them. So they have to like find a witch mark on their house that tells them they're under a curse, or someone has to curse them to their face, or they have to hear that they've been put under a curse, or something like that. And that would suggest that a lot of what's happening in these psychic attack situations is the nocebo effect, where you're using psychology to harm somebody. And so where this gets into the question of lying and deception would be, are there circumstances in which it's okay to use the nocebo effect, taking the form of, a curse or the evil eye or something like that, to hurt somebody? Well, in the ancient world, people commonly thought the answer was yes. And we know that because we have all kinds of curses that they put on people. I mean, archaeology has discovered all these things. They're called defixaciones, or curse tablets. What you would do in the ancient world, this was common in Mediterranean and Greece and Rome and up into the British Isles. But what you would do is you would write out a curse. You get a piece of lead, thin lead, and you'd write out a curse on it. I want, Cameron Bertuzzi to suffer and die horribly because of how he's mistreated me, blah, 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 blah. And then you fold it up.
Clip that out. What you just said, we'll clip it out. We'll put it next to I'm not a Christian.
Out of context theater. Yeah. But anyway, you then fold up your curse tablet. So you got a little square of lead, and you take a nail and drive it through the curse tablet, and then you bury it underground. So the underworld deities will read your curse tablet and then go after your preferred victim. And if someone knows that that's been done to them and they're a believer in this system, they can actually die as a result of that. In fact, we have cases here in America. I'm going to do Arthur C. Clarke had on one of his shows back in the 80s, I guess, a case from Oklahoma where a man had such respect for his mom that when his mom put a curse on him, he died. And I'm going to cover that in a future Mysterious World. Well, so could this kind of nocebo effect, involving deception as it does, could it ever be justified? Well, maybe. In fact, we've used things like this on various foreign adversaries, like Emmanuel Noriega. There was a period where, so for people who may not remember, Emmanuel Noriega was a Latin American dictator that during the, Reagan Bush years. And he was in a tense conflict with the United States. And the U.S. was performing psyops on him, and he was doing counter activity. He was like, running a drug lord ring, something like that. And we eventually got him and put him on trial, and he's in prison here in the United States now. But as part of the softening up of him as a target, they used curses, which he believed in an attempt to psych him out and make him more vulnerable to U.S. advances. And so if you've got someone who's a drug lord, a criminal, a dictator, some really bad person, well, if physical violence would be justified in taking care of this person, then potentially doxastic damage or lying to the person, including putting a curse on them. Even if you don't believe in curses, if they believe in curses and you can psych them out, you could potentially use a curse to deal with that person, which would be preferable to actually killing them. If you can avoid killing them by psyching them out with a curse, then absolutely you could use a curse on them, potentially.
Yeah, that's very interesting stuff. Okay, so
I like that to protect himself from the curse that so the general in charge of U.S. intelligence at the time was named Arthur Stubblebine, and to protect himself against the curses, Noriega wrote General Stubblebine's name on paper and put it in both of his shoes. So he was walking around with General Stubblebine's name in his shoes to protect him from the curses coming from General Stubblebine. I just think that's cool.
yeah, you know what? It actually reminds me of something that I was investigating yesterday. It's only very tangentially related. So, do you
Mhm.
have you heard of the Sibylline Oracles?
Oh yeah, I've written about the
Yeah.
Sibylline Oracles.
Really? Okay, it's
Mhm.
super fascinating stuff. This like I was asking ChatGPT the other day. I was like, "Hey, what's something that not a lot of Christians will know about?" And the Sibylline Oracles is what it mentioned. And
Mhm.
the Sibylline Oracles are a very fascinating piece of literature. Or it's
Mhm.
not just one. There's many of them, but the early Christians were using them to
Yep.
evangelize, and
Mhm.
it's just crazy stuff. Like the early Christians were literal geniuses. Like they were so smart, and they had to be because of how much persecution they were experiencing. But the
Mhm.
Sibylline Oracles are it kind of reminded me of that because they were these sort of pagan prophecies about the
Mhm.
future, and the Christians were like, "Hey, look, I forget what the name of it is. It's like some sort of Greek or Latin name that they would use these sorts of existing pagan beliefs and use
Mhm.
them to be like, hey, look, everything points back to Christianity. Like even these other prophecies in these other religions still point back to Christ. Like, hey, you got to, yeah, why don't you guys just come over to the truth? We've got all the truth here. You've got bits and pieces over there, but we've got everything here. And they use the Sibylline Oracles to do that. I'm thinking about making a video about that just because no one,
Uh-huh.
not a lot of people have heard about it. But maybe, I mean, since you've written about it, maybe we can talk about it just a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So, for folks who may not be aware, in the ancient world, they had a group of prophetesses that were known as sibyls, and they gave oracles at various different places. The most famous of them is the oracle at Delphi, but there were other oracles too, who were known as sibyls, and they gave. There was one in particular that was connected with Rome who gave various predictions that were written down in a book that was kept secret, and they would only bring out this book occasionally, like when there was a major crisis in Rome, and they would consult this book and say, okay, so what does the Sibyl have? Does the Sibyl have anything to say about this current crisis we're in and what we should do? And we know about that book, and we know a few of the things it contained because they took action at a certain point. They would find a prophecy in the book, and then it might prescribe you need to do the following sacrifices, and so the Roman officials would do that, and we have historical records of them doing that. So we know some of the stuff that was in this book, but the book itself ended up being lost. Well, what happened was a group of writers who are unknown to us, they apparently included pagans, Jews, and Christians, started writing and publishing books that claimed to have been written by the Sibyl or one of the Sibyls. And they put these out, and they contain various prophecies, and you can kind of date them based on which prophecies they contain and what they're pointing to. Where I wrote about them was I did a major, is like a 22,000 word study of an early Christian apocalypse called the Ascension of Isaiah. And I was dating the Ascension of Isaiah, figuring out when it was written. And so for that, I had to interact with material in the Sibylline Oracles. And so that's where have written about them thus far. I ended up concluding the Ascension of Isaiah was written in AD 67, which plus or minus a year, which makes it older than the book of Hebrews and older than the book of Revelation. So it's really fascinating to have an early Christian apocalypse that's older than some of the books of the New Testament. In any event, you're right. What Jewish and Christian authors would do is they would slip stuff into the Sibylline Oracles as a way of encouraging pagans to think positively about Christianity or Judaism and maybe to convert. to Christianity. And they would say, look, I mean, you have your prophets, they're telling you stuff. Some of that stuff has to do with Jesus. You need to take that seriously. And in fact, some of the church fathers were very open to this. Now, these church fathers didn't seem to know that the passages in the Sibylline Oracles that were Christian were by Christians. They thought they were really by, the Sibyl.
Yeah.
But they would say, look, your own prophets say this about Jesus. And so they would acknowledge that the Sibyl had a prophetic gift. And in spite of the fact that the Sibyl was a pagan, they would just say, yeah, okay, she's a pagan and she's a prophet and she sometimes talks about Jesus. And so that's a sign that God's at least working through her at least some of the time. And in fact, if you go to Rome today and you look in the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican, not the Sistine Chapel at St. Mary Major's, but the Sistine Chapel at St. Peter's, when you look up on the walls, they have all these religious symbols and pictures, paintings of religious figures. Mm-hmm. And some of them are based on the Sibylline Oracles. You'll see the Sibyl up there as a prophetess pointing forward to Christ.
Yeah, this all actually makes me think about, because I think scholars actually date these Sibylline Oracles to after the time of Christ, because they contain some of them, I think is book 10, I believe, that contains like some explicit mention of Jesus, or something very close to like the crucifixion and stuff. And so a lot of scholars will be like, well, this is very good evidence that the Christians sort of altered the existing oracles, even if they were just sort of orated earlier on. Whenever they got written down, they then sort of changed them and adapted them to evangelize, to get people to become Christians based on. So it does actually relate to the topic today. Would it be okay? That was actually another question I was going to ask you, is in the context of apologetics and evangelism, would it be okay to lie to people to get them to accept Christianity and become a Christian? I think that this is a very poignant question, because in Islamic apologetics, there's a lot of accusations from the Christian side that Muslims are engaged in deception and lying. And so maybe from their perspective, they might be able to defend themselves by saying, well, even if we are lying and deceiving, it's all justified, because what we're attempting to do is to save people's eternal fates, their eternal, wherever they're going to end up. We want them to be in heaven with us. So yeah, how does that work? Would it ever be okay to lie and deceive people to get them to embrace the truth about Christianity?
So there's going to be a difference of opinion, including among Christian apologists, about this. There are some Christian apologists, some of whom I've met, who don't have a problem playing fast and loose with the truth, in order to, in their view, save souls. But this would not fit my theory of lying, because this is
some things are just.
This is a lie that can never. This kind of thing you can never lie about. You cannot lie about God, and so just like you can't say there is no God or I am not a Christian, you cannot lie to people about the reasons they should embrace God. And so my theory of lying would say this is a no-go. You must be scrupulously honest when it comes to reasons for why people should embrace Christianity. And thus, even though I think the Sibylline Oracles are fascinating as historical documents, if I were transported back in time and could talk to their authors, I would tell them, no, do not do this. Do not seed the Sibylline Oracles with Christian content. If you want to write Christian content, that's fine, but you must do it honestly. You cannot deceive people into coming to God.
Yeah, the Sibylline Oracles, when I first heard about it, I was like, is this like Dungeons and Dragons type stuff? It's like just the name of it alone, the Sibylline Oracles, and how it's like it's rooted in this sort of pagan, these prophetesses and stuff. It's like it's such an interesting topic, but it's very related to the topic today about lying and how Christians, I mean, even if like it was wrong for them to do, it nevertheless I think was brilliant for them to, because what they were trying to do was engage with the culture. And instead of, so one thing that you can do when you're engaging the culture as a Christian, you're trying to evangelize, is you can combat what other people are saying. You can tear down what they're saying and say, here's an argument against your position, here's an argument for my position. And so instead of this sort of offensive approach, they were like going along with the pagans and being like, hey, look, your stuff points to us as well. And so it wasn't that they were necessarily tearing down these alternative viewpoints. They were trying to use them to bring everyone back to Christ. And we can disagree about whether or not that was the right moral thing to do, but nevertheless it was. And I think it was born out of a desire to evangelize, but we have to also remember the context, because in our context, we're not really being persecuted, nowhere near the degree that they were in, like, say, the 2nd century, right? And so the fact that they, yes, but the reason, I think it can help explain why they were tempted to engage in these sorts of apologetic strategies, if you will, is because of the context of persecution back then. Whereas if in that time period they were going on the offensive and saying all of your beliefs are false, they would have been eradicated. They would just be like, okay, you guys are just annoying, let's get rid of you. And so instead of that, they tried to work alongside people and say, hey, look, your stuff kind of points to Christianity too. So, and I'm not using that as a justification. I'm just saying that it's a very brilliant strategy on their part, even if it was.
And the general strategy can be used positively. Now, one of the things that various church fathers, like, for example, Eusebius of Caesarea, would say is that there are seeds of the gospel in pagan religions. There are little things that are similar and that point to Christianity. And St. Paul himself used this approach when he visited Athens in Acts 17. He's just come to Athens after some bad experiences up in Mesopotamia, or not in Mesopotamia, Thrace, and has he sees an altar to an unknown god, which to the Greeks' credits, they had the thought of, oh, there must be a god we don't know about, so let's build an altar to him and give him the worship that he deserves, even though we don't know who he is. And so, according to legend, this altar, if I recall correctly, was actually put in place by the pre-Socratic philosopher Zeno. And Paul saw this altar, and then when he's speaking at Mars Hill, which was basically a discussion club, he points to that altar as an example of how the Athenians had good spiritual instincts in some regards. And then he goes on to quote several Greek authors about how, we're his own children and stuff like that. So Paul himself found seeds of the gospel in Greek write-ins and then would use them to evangelize Greeks. And so that strategy is actually good and healthy and biblical. What the editors of the Sibylline Oracles did, though, that was not good, was they then put words in the Sibyl's mouth that the Sibyl did not say. And so they used deception. Whereas what Paul was doing was not deception. It was building on common ground. He wasn't falsifying anything that the Greeks had said. He was just pointing to correct bits of what they'd said and building the base for Christianity there. That's good, but what the editors of the Sibylline Oracles did was bad, in my view, by using deception. Incidentally, a lot of the things that the Sibylline Oracles, or that oracles in this age said, were sometimes kind of sketchy, and could be read more than one way. But they also had some notable hits. In fact, the first experiment we have records of in remote viewing was done by, and I'm going to blank on his name, particular king in Turkey, modern Turkey, wanted to know, should I go to war with the Persians? And he wanted to make sure he was talking to an oracle who really had contact with the supernatural world. So he sent like 10 messengers to 10 different oracles and told them, wait 100 days. And on the 100th day, go see the oracle and ask what is, was it Midas? Ask what the king is doing right now and come back and tell me what they say I'm doing on that 100th day. And he determined that he was going to do something very unkingly so that so they couldn't guess it by random chance. If you said a king is hearing law cases or the king is in his counting house counting out his money, those would be kingly things to do. But one thing kings don't do, by the way, howdy there, Tyler.
Hey, sorry about
One
this.
No problem. One thing kings don't do is cook their own food. That's what they have servants for. And so he decided he was going to have a cooking day and he was going to cook some bizarre food. He got a lamb and a turtle and he cut up the lamb and he cut up the turtle and he put them in a bronze pot and covered it with a bronze lid and made lamb and turtle soup. And it turns out the oracle at Delphi got a hit and said, he's making lamb and turtle soup. And so he said, okay, that's beyond random chance. The oracle at Delphi is seriously in touch with the paranormal. So now I'm going to ask my real question I'm interested in. Should I attack the Persians? And the oracle, now what he had gotten evidence for was that the oracle is clairvoyant, can see distant or hidden things. But now he's asking a question that involves a different ability, precognition. Should I attack them? What will happen if I attack them? And the oracle came back with, if you attack them, a great empire will be destroyed, which he took to mean I'm going to kick their butts. But really, they kicked his butts. And so the prediction turned out to be
butts?
true.
He had multiple butts?
Well, we've kind of all got two. Anyway, they kicked his butt, and his great empire was destroyed, but not in the way he anticipated. But
Tyler,
little fun story.
Yeah, Tyler is now here, and
yay!
Interesting part of the conversation for you to join, Tyler. It doesn't sound like we're talking anything about the topic. Let me just kind of explain for you where we're at, and then
sort of a bridge to let Tyler get on.
Yeah. Let me just kind of explain where we were and how we kind of got here. So, the latest question we've been exploring is, could it ever be okay to lie apologetically? So, would it ever be okay to lie, say, about certain truths about the gospel or about God or Jesus in order to save their souls, in order to get them to accept Christ? Because and that was actually one of the examples that we used was the Sibylline Oracles. I don't know if you've ever heard of those, that were these sort of pagan oracles in around the time of Christ that were then co-opted by the early Christians to try to evangelize the pagans at the time. And they made some scribal changes according to scholars and stuff to change them to be a little bit more Christian friendly, or the prophecies to be a little bit more aligned with Christianity. And they were using those to be like, hey, look, your own documents still come and prove that Christianity is true. And so it almost is kind of this like deception that they were engaged in. And that's how we got to the topic that we were just discussing. But why don't we bring you in and let you share any thoughts on that, or just share some more general thoughts on the topic?
Yeah. So I guess this would kind of more fundamentally, and maybe you've already discussed this, but what is a lie, and so what constitutes a lie, and then what is the kind of like moral framework that's behind what constitutes a lie as for why lying is wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I suppose, I don't know if y'all have gotten to touch on this at all, but I guess that would be naturally where I would first go.
We talked about that at the beginning, which I didn't mention, but we did touch on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I am sympathetic to kind of like a traditional natural law view, where you look at the human person, and you can see, like, okay, if the human person didn't have any impediments, any cognitive malfunction, if they weren't cut off too early from growing and developing, right, we can kind of get a sense of what it means for a person to be human, or what it means for them to flourish. And so, for example, we can kind of look at the human mouth and kind of gauge that, okay, the mouth is to tell truths, or it's to communicate, it's to eat, right? Um, and so we can kind of understand that like optimal flourishing human being would be able to have such a faculty and use it for these sorts of various ends. Or similar, like what are the eyes for? Sadly, as you can tell, right, my eyes not so good. Um, they're to see, right? Hands to pick up objects, or feet to move, the heart to pump blood, the lungs to get oxygen and to put it in your bloodstream, right? So we can kind of use our perception and come to an understanding of what the human person is, and how they should be functioning, what it means to function as this sort of being that they are. And so, for example, if I told you that I'm going to poke my eyes out right now, uh, so that I can't see anymore, right? Would we say that I'm flourishing? Um, Not as much as I could be, right? If So similarly, like if I all of a sudden put something in my heart to where it can't pump blood, right? Would we say I'm flourishing as well as I could be? No, given human nature, that's not as flourishing as much as I could be, right? So similarly, if we say the mouth, I'm going to go ahead and convey lies, right? Well, if it's to tell truth, then I'm kind of perverting my faculty from being able to achieve its end. And as a rational agent who has self-interest in my own flourishing and ability to enable my flourishing, that would be bad of me. Um, that would be irresponsible of me to do. If I think flourishing is good, this would not enable flourishing. This would then be bad. And so here's kind of like a general framework, this kind of general traditional natural law framework of understanding, um, you know, at least to some degree, what can be right or wrong in accordance with human flourishing, which can be understood through our reason, our human reason and observation. And so, of course, you can get into other debates, right? Like, well, what is lying? Maybe we can't tell lies with our mouths. Maybe that would be the contrary end. But maybe you think lying isn't just conveying something that's intentionally false. Maybe you think lying something a little bit different. And then, of course, like you have intentions. That's another question, right? Maybe you end up saying something that's false, but that's actually not your intention. And so, like, how narrow are we going to understand our intention? So, on natural law view, typically those who endorse a doctrine of double effect, right? You want to analyze the action, what you're doing, the act itself, the object. You want to analyze the intentions behind that act, and you want to analyze the consequences of the act. And so, doctrine double effect says actually we can do certain things um, that have bad outcomes under certain conditions. Namely, if what we're doing in itself, the actual act, is not intrinsically wrong, um, and you've got good intentions, and overall there's still going to be a net neutral or net positive for what you're doing. If you've got no other better alternatives, then whatever action you're talking about is permissible. So we can apply this to lying. Of course, maybe you might think again, lying is intrinsically wrong. So maybe you think, well, we can't use the doctrine of double effect because lying is not an option here. But maybe if we're like really narrow intentionalists, we can say something like, my intention isn't to say something that's false. That's a side effect of what I'm going to say, how I move my mouth. That's a side effect of the utterances that are going to come out of my mouth. But maybe that's not the intention. And so these are all different ways that I think people could discuss about lying, whether it's permissible, even kind of on a natural law view. But overall, the framework that I'm kind of working with would be that we can know right and wrong from perception, from observation, from human nature, and we can tell what a human being is supposed to do, how they're supposed to flourish. And if we intentionally prevent our flourishing, then that's bad if flourishing is good. And so it seems like lying, which again, opening the definition of what is considered lying, and even if our intention is to lie, right? But lying, if you define it rightly and the intention's there, then that could never be justified on this.
That's your view.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic.
That,
Yeah, that's the view I typically hold to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because of the flourishing. Yeah, well, let me just kind of bring it back to the example that we talked about with the Nazis and hiding Jews and stuff. So, on your view, if a Nazi came to the door, you were hiding Jews, and they said, "Where are they?" and you would then tell them that you have Jews and that they should go and kill them.
No, I definitely wouldn't.
So, what would you do?
So there are different things here. One, you could of course just refuse to talk, in which case you'll probably die. Another thing is you can deceive them. So I do think that there to be.
Oh man, Jimmy's gonna love talking to you about this.
Distinct acts. I think lying involves deception, but not all deception is lying. And so when I pump fake in basketball, I'm in a sense deceiving my opponent. But if Jesus played basketball and all of a sudden he pump faked someone, I don't think we'd be like, Jesus pump faked. Oh no, right? He's a liar. He's moral issues, right? There's a famous story. I'm sure Jimmy knows if it's actually historical or not, but I've heard it on several occasions. Maybe you've already talked about it. The Athanasius story. Have y'all discussed this?
No.
So Athanasius is like fleeing persecution, and you have some sort of government entity that's after him, and they run into Athanasius, and Athanasius is like on a little boat, rowing boat, and they're like, Athanasius, have you seen him? And Athanasius is like, oh yes, he's not far from here. And they're like, okay, great, thanks, and they continue their journey, and it's like. Clearly, Athanasius is deceiving them, but he's not lying to them. He's not saying a false proposition. And so maybe you think that in certain contexts, depending on what's owed to the person in reference to how much truth is being owed, maybe you might think that's permissible. So you might try to pull something like that with the Nazis, right, where you're deceiving them. Be like, yeah, there's no Jews in my home. Little do you know, I don't actually own a home. I'm renting, right? Yeah. Something like that. And then, of course, again, like, how are we actually defining lying? Are we defining lying as simply just intentionally stating something that's false? And is that actually my narrow intention? Is my narrow intention to lie, or is that just kind of a side effect of what I'm saying? So there are other areas that you might want to push and massage and so forth.
Yeah, Jimmy, before you come in, I just want to ask one more clarifying question from Tyler. So it sounds like your view is that it's from natural law is all sort of internal. So it's like whatever is going to lead to your flourishing is what you should ultimately end up doing. Do you ever consider like the flourishing of other people when you're trying to make a decision based on natural law, or is natural law really just all about the flourishing of you in individually?
Yeah, no. So, right. So my flourishing actually depends on others' flourishing as well. So we're social animals. And so I need other people to flourish, which is why morality is not just something that's kept alone in the home, but it's public and affects us all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the idea though is it ever okay to do something that is intrinsically wrong? And by definition, if something's intrinsically wrong, it's never okay to do it. So the question is, can you do something that you see?
Wait, what did you argued that it was intrinsically wrong? When did you do that? I didn't
no.
catch
So
that.
what I'm saying is, if something is intrinsically wrong, that means there's no justification to ever do it. So you're gonna have to come up with a different route, even if it means saving other people. So for example, I think it's intrinsically wrong to torture. So if there was a person here and maybe they were a terrorist, right? I think it's actually wrong to like go all Jack Bauer on them and start cutting up fingernails and eyelids and stuff like that. Even if that's going to save other people, right? Well, because if it's intrinsically wrong, then there's no acceptable scenario where that's okay. Or if it's like you have to murder a 2-year-old who's innocent, obviously they're 2, to save 10 people, right? I think that's never okay to do. So if something's intrinsically wrong, then it doesn't matter if it's going to make other people flourish or not, live or not. It's intrinsically wrong. It's not permissible to do. And so the real question as it pertains to lying in this case is lying intrinsically wrong? I think it is, because it perverts faculties from achieving their end. But again, then there's a larger question, which is what is lying? And so maybe we can come up with cases that aren't technically lying, when it comes to the Nazis, or is the lying coming about from an indirect means? Is it coming about as a side effect of something that you're intending to do, rather than intentionally lying directly? So anyway, that's kind of the issue.
Okay. So Jimmy, I've held you off for too long.
No, that's okay. So I've got a number, and I realized, we covered some of the same ground at the beginning.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So, no problem. So,
No, it wasn't actually your fault. It was my fault. I wasn't paying attention to our text on timing and stuff. So you were completely correct here about the timing. I just started things a little bit too early. But yeah, no, feel free to continue.
So I guess I'll make a couple of points. Then I have a series of questions I'd like to ask to cross-examine your position. So it seems to me there are two productive ways of defining lying. The first one is lying is the use of words with the intent to deceive. Because actors on a stage play are saying false things, but they're not trying to deceive anybody. So it could be you're saying something false with the intent to deceive, or saying or acting with the intent to deceive, which is actually used in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So it doesn't restrict lying to just the use of words.
Right.
So, those are I recognize there are other ways to define lying, but to my mind, those are the two that are worth talking about. Okay. And I think, frankly, the second one, where it's not confined to the use of words, is the better one. Because the real issue here is deception. And we don't just deceive with our mouths. We don't just communicate with our mouths. We communicate with our actions and as well. So if I roll my eyes, that's not words, but that's communication. And if I sigh and, that's not words, but that's communication. Or if I point with my finger, that's not words, but that's communication. So really, I think that the Thomistic tradition has an over-focus on the tongue, and which actually has multiple uses, as if it were the only faculty we have for communication. I don't think that's true. We communicate all kinds of different ways. I agree. And therefore, I wouldn't restrict lying to just the use of words. Yeah. And that effectively makes lying equivalent to deception. If you're deceiving somebody through whatever action you're doing it, whether it's pointing or sighing or rolling your eyes or speaking, you're effectively lying if you're intending to deceive. So for me, the question is it ever okay to deceive somebody? Now, you mentioned, based on this kind of body read-in natural law theory, you mentioned how our hands have certain functions and our eyes have certain functions. And to illustrate that, you at one point said, suppose I told you I was going to pluck out my eyes. Yeah. And that's some nice body horror. So, effective illustration, good body horror. And it's like, of course, that's not the function of your hands. You shouldn't be pulling out your eyes with your hands. But let me give you a counterexample. Okay. I finally, after 20 years, got around to watching the Kill Bill movies by Quentin Tarantino. Yeah. And in the Kill Bill movies, the main character, who's known as the Bride, is seeking revenge on Bill and his associates who murdered her fiancé and everybody at her wedding. That's why she's called the Bride. And she's hunting them down one by one to get revenge. Now, you can debate, maybe she shouldn't be doing that. But at a particular moment in Kill Bill Volume 2, she's dealing with Bill's main aide, who is a woman. I forget what they call her, but she's got an eye patch. So she's only got one eye. And the two of them are in a trailer in the desert, and they're having a battle with a Japanese katana with swords. Yeah. And the Bride is losing, and she's injured, and she is going to die in this battle. She's just Bill's aide is kicking her butt. I won't say butts because Cameron jumped on me about that, but she's really getting beaten badly. And in the middle of this fight, as the two of them are face to face holding their swords together, the Bride has an idea, and she because her opponent has only one eye. So
Mhm.
she reaches out, snatches her other eye out, and her opponent is thus not able to continue the fight.
Mhm.
And she's even saved her, theoretically, she saved her opponent's life because she doesn't have to kill her now. Okay, I agree. Plucking out your own eyes is
Mhm.
not a good idea. And there's effective, intuitive revulsion to that. But is what the bride did
Mhm.
morally justified?
Mhm.
Could, in that circumstance where she's going to die
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and evil's going to triumph, and the only way she can't beat her physically in the fight, the only
Right.
way she can survive is to stop her ability to fight by plucking out her eye. Was that okay?
So to clarify,
Mm-hmm.
um, the person plucking out their eye is themselves, right? Herself.
No, 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 no. The
Am I plucking
bride
out your eye?
is plucking out her enemy's eye.
Oh, okay. You know what? Yeah. So I mean, there's natural law typically sees that the idea of self defense. You can even kill the person,
Yeah,
stop their ability, um, uh,
right.
completely.
Okay,
And so it
good.
wouldn't just be a
So
plucking out of an eye. You can kill them. So what typically is understood, as far as I understand, within the natural law tradition, is I can't prevent my faculty from being able to achieve its end,
mhm.
which is a bit of a different scenario than, as I understand it, than the scenario you've presented.
Well, if we love our neighbor as ourself, I'm preventing her faculty of vision from fulfilling its end.
Hmm. Yeah. Well,
Um,
so if go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. So I think the important point is we agree, even though it's wrong, all
Hmm.
things being considered, to pluck out your own eye, there are circumstances where you can use your hand to
Right.
pluck out somebody's eye. And that shows that there are circumstances where you wouldn't say my hands are designed to kill people.
Hmm.
But there are circumstances where it can be legitimate to use my hands to kill people.
Right.
If someone's breaking in and is going to kill me and my family,
Hmm.
I can use my hands to kill that person.
Right. Right.
But you wouldn't natively say, oh, hands are for killing people. And
Right.
so I think this natural law tradition needs to think more broadly about the purposes to which our body parts can be put. And thus, I think that they need to be open to the possibility of deception
Mm-hmm.
being achieved by one or another body part, whether it's my hand or my eyes or my tongue or whatever it may be. Because here's my next scenario: we're back at the house in Nazi
Right.
Germany. I'm hiding Jews in my attic, a whole family of them. A
Uh-huh.
couple of Nazis come to my door.
Right.
The only way to save their lives is to use deception.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if it's a mental reservation. I don't care if it's I don't care if it's, oh, come on in and look at my Nazi flag.
Right. Right.
Whatever. It's deception. The only way to save the Jewish lives is deception. Refusing to answer is not going to work.
Right.
And using a mental reservation or something like that is another form of deception.
Right.
Now, I believe you mentioned I could, and I actually covered this with Cameron, I could kill these Nazis.
Hmm.
I could kill them and hide their
Right.
bodies
Right. Right.
and deal with the problem that way.
Right.
Well, if I can kill these Nazis,
Right.
it seems intuitively obvious to me that lying to the Nazis and not killing them is less bad than
Hmm.
actually killing them. Among other things, if I kill them, they have no chance to repent. But if I deceive them, they get to live another day and they may even repent of being Nazis in the future. So, for a variety of reasons, it seems to me that using the less damage. Now, I agree, and this is something Cameron and I covered. I am doing damage to them. I'm
Right.
damaging their belief system by feeding them a false belief. So, that's
Hmm.
doxastic damage in philosophical
Right.
terms.
Right.
It seems to me that doing doxastic damage is less damage and
Hmm.
preferable to using lethal physical force to do terminal physical damage to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I would see lying to them as morally justified in this situation.
Right.
Would you agree with that? Or if you disagree with that, where do you think I'm going wrong?
Right. So a lot there. A
Mm-hmm.
lot there. I guess a couple things. One, I agree with you. Obviously, we can communicate things without language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for example, animals communicate to each other.
And they deceive each other.
Yeah. A lot goes on with the animal world, right? Without
Mm-hmm.
conveying propositions through an intelligible language like our own.
Mm-hmm.
However, I still am weary of your account of deception or of lying, in part because, what are we to make of the pump faking example, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
in the Gospels, Jesus seems to sometimes act. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
in some sense, you could say deceive.
Oh, yeah.
Think about when he's resurrected, right? And
On
it
the
looks
road to Emmaus and when he's walking
exactly,
on water.
exactly. Or he's acting like he's going to continue to go on, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
no. Um, so I'd be worried for those sorts of reasons. Would your definition make these cases lying?
I would say that so the way my system works is it is okay to damage someone doxastically for a proportionate reason.
Hmm.
But there are certain types of lies that are intrinsically wrong.
Hmm.
And those are ones connected with like God and the faith. So
Hmm.
I can never say I am not a Christian if I'm directly
Right.
required to answer that. I can never deceive someone in order to trick them into becoming a Christian.
Hmm.
Those kinds of lies are illegitimate that are connected with God.
Right.
But apart from intrinsically wrong forms of deception, other forms of deception are justified for a proportionate reason. In your pump fake example, I would say it's an expected part of the game.
Uh-huh.
And the greater good, the proportionate reason that justifies it is the fun that
Right.
people have from playing the game.
Right.
So just like I would say, I'll never mind. I was going to say something else, but I realized it's a bad example. But in the fake example, even though I don't know enough sports ball, I'm having to deduce the meaning of that term on the fly.
Yeah.
That it's justified as an expected part of the game that enhances everybody's fun.
Yeah.
In terms of where Jesus seems to be going further,
Right.
and there are a couple of ways of handling that. One way would be to say, well, he would have gone further if they hadn't stopped him. He would have just kept going. So there may not be deception there, or he may have passed by the boat altogether if the disciples hadn't cried out. So there may not be deception there. If there is deception there, then I would say it was, again, for the purposes of a greater good, of teaching them some lesson by making it harder for them. This is the same principle by which he teaches people in parables, by making them wrestle to get the truth. That actually increases the value of what they learn.
You'd be okay with Jesus lying then? It's not an intrinsically evil lie. It's a justifiable lie that's within proportion. But
I'm not going to call it lying because it's because of the problems that's going to trigger people's pious impulses.
Gotcha.
But could Jesus use deception?
Yeah.
To achieve some good?
Yeah.
I don't think deception is intrinsically evil.
Right. Yeah, so I agree with you there. Deception is not intrinsically evil.
So you would agree that Jesus could use deception to achieve a proportionate good.
Right. But
Yeah,
on
I would
my
agree
account,
too.
that it wouldn't be lying.
Mhm.
And so it still wouldn't be Jesus lying. It seems like on your account, Jesus could use lies as defined as.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think
that seems intuitively
Mhm.
not it's a reductio to the definition. Like we must come up with a different definition of lying because that just seems
right. So I think that it's an unfleshed out part of our definition of lying. If you want to use the term lying to mean something like use of words or actions to deceive in an intrinsically evil way, then no, Jesus wouldn't ever lie.
Yeah.
But you've added intrinsic evil into the definition at that point. If you leave it out of the definition and it's so that it's just effectively, could Jesus ever use deception for a sufficient reason? I would say, well, it's not intrinsically evil, so he could.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess that would be one issue where I'm like, I think maybe we need to relook at the definition of lying. I personally, I don't have a good definition, nor again, it's not even clear to me if you can kind of get past some of these issues by narrowing the intention and by how we define lying. That certain cases might not actually be lying. But my larger point is just that I think that that definition, of course, all views have certain positives and negatives for them, or just generally. But it would seem to me like that definition of lying would have some residual issues with the counterintuitiveness that Jesus can lie to for
Yeah,
proportionate reasons and so forth.
I agree. But you keep using prejudicial language when it comes to Jesus and talking about Jesus lying. I think it's safer to talk about Jesus using deception because we don't have an agreed upon definition of lie.
Right. Well, so that's why I'm just thinking it must not be a lie. So that definition is just we just need to rework the definition of lying. In reference to your statement about lying being you're doing less damage to them, obviously, than like slitting their throats, right?
Or plucking their eyes out or strangling them or whatever it may be.
Yeah, so I definitely agree. Except, so the difference would be, in one case, I am preventing my faculty from achieving its end. In the other case, I'm not. So in the case where I'm lying, I'm harming myself. And the case of where I'm killing them, I'm not harming myself. So that would, I think, be the big disanalogy. And then I guess I have some friends who would say, "Oh, it's not even really the parts that need to achieve their ends. It's the powers or the faculties of the parts." And so it's you can take out eyeballs, for example, if it gets infected, as long as you're not like preventing the powers of the part, the eye, from seeing, or something like that. My own personal view, I'm like actually okay with saying, okay, well, maybe there needs to be some kind of nice delineation for when it's okay to remove parts and that sort of thing. And so removing parts obviously is not intrinsically evil. Like someone has some disease and their hand is falling off and it's going to consume their whole body, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm open to so don't look at my view as necessarily a classic natural law perspective. It's inspired, obviously, by traditional natural law view, but I'm okay with these sorts of issues. So, and just to summarize the 3 points, and then I'll pipe down again, of course, is that first off, I worried that the definition of lying that you mentioned has the ramifications of making Jesus lying, or ability to lie to do good, and I don't want to accept that. So it makes me think we just need to get a different definition of lying. And then secondly, the distinction between me killing the Nazi, me lying to the Nazi, isn't in reference to the pain I'm causing on them, but the pain I'm causing on myself. If I lie, if I lie, then I'm preventing my own faculties from achieving their end, my mouth from achieving its end, something like that. And then thirdly, just with respect to me being open to the idea that, and if we're talking about on faculties or parts from my own body, I'm quite open to the idea that removal is okay. Obviously, all natural law theorists would say that. They would just have different ways of going about it. And it might even be the case that it's okay to prevent certain faculties from achieving their end under certain conditions or something like that. So I'm not completely set against that. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things, so I want to give you credit for taking a traditional natural law approach with regard to that middle point of, well, if it's intrinsically wrong, then it must be somehow harming myself. Because that's the only way it could be intrinsically wrong, is if I'm abusing my own faculties in some way. So that's a good move on a traditional natural law account. I just don't believe it.
Right.
Because it's not restricted to our tongues. We lie to people in all kinds of ways. And you've already agreed that, if I heard you right, that I could use deception on the Nazis.
Right.
I could, say I could have a strategically planted Nazi flag in my living room and say to them, would I, a devout Nazi, hide Jews in my attic? Are you crazy? And deceive them.
Right.
Okay. I didn't say anything I may have even joined the Nazi party for purposes of deception,
Right.
but I haven't said anything false to them necessarily. But I have used deception, or I don't have to use words. I could just point to my flag and cross my eyebrows and shame them into turning away from my door. That's still deception.
Right.
So but I haven't used my mouth in that at all. I've used my eyebrows and my finger. And I think that's still a lie. That's still deception. So I think we're both agreed that deception can work, and I don't see a convincing reason why my tongue suddenly has the potential for abuse that my other faculties don't. That makes it intrinsically wrong to use my tongue to do that, as opposed to my eyes and my finger to do that. So I appreciate the move you're making. I personally don't find it convincing.
Can I also say, on top of that, in response to the first thing you guys were talking about, Tyler, that it would mean that it was okay for Jesus to lie. I mean, wouldn't it just be okay to like bite that bullet and just be like, well, yeah. I mean, once we understand what the definition of lying is in the terms of what Jimmy has said, and Jimmy also doesn't believe in, and maybe we haven't talked about this since you've been here, Tyler, but he doesn't believe that just any old thing that you lie about could be okay. Like he thinks that some lies are just you can't lie about some things. Yeah. So on that understanding, like once we flesh out what it means, then maybe that bullet is lessened. Like you still, I guess, got to bite some sort of bullet. But once we flesh out what lie actually means, and then we understand that there's some sort, it really just involves deception, and sometimes deception, there can be justifying reasons for that deception. Once we fully flesh it out, maybe the bullet isn't so big of a bullet to bite.
Yeah, so I agree with you that you can soften the bullet, but it still seems like a tough bullet on my end.
I think,
and is that just intuitively?
Yeah.
I think partly
it's intuitively.
I think partly that may be because you're clinging to the word lie, and you're associating the word lie with verbal deception,
or something else other than what Jimmy was saying.
But you've already agreed you want to revisit that term. You don't know what it means, and to my mind, well, then you can't really, if you don't know what this term means, then you can't really draw firm conclusions about what Jesus would or wouldn't do if you don't know what the term means. So I think there's a prejudicial language aspect affecting the discussion here.
Yeah, I think we can determine like what it's not, right? So for example, I can say lying is not watching James Bond. I can rule that out. I can rule out that lying is not telling my wife my true deepest romantic feelings. Right? I can rule out things in reference to that. I can kind of figure out, okay, that definition is not going to work. That definition is not going to work, even if I don't have a precise good definition myself. And so I guess that it would seem just like unintuitive to think that Jesus lied. Like, well, maybe that's just like a reductio. Maybe we should just think that's not what lying is. So let's rule that out. Let's come up with another definition of lying where Jesus isn't said to have lied, but yet clearly deceiving. So maybe there is a distinction, a real distinction between the two.
Okay, well, let's look at it this way. Suppose Jesus is at his house in Nazi Germany, and the Nazis come to his door, and they don't realize he's Jewish, but they ask him, do you have any Jews in your attic? And in fact, he's got the whole Holy Family up there, all his cousins and everything.
And himself,
and himself. But there's also a Nazi flag in here.
Right.
Could Jesus point at the Nazi flag and scowl until the German soldiers turn away from his door? Could he do that?
Well,
okay,
I think so.
Good. So he's just used deception.
Right.
So we're agreed Jesus could use deception to save human life.
That's right.
But could he then say, look at my Nazi flag. Are you crazy? He just used words as part of the deception. Could he do that? Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of people would look at that and say Jesus just lied to them.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that. Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to consider then lying a subset of verbal deception. It's
Right.
not all verbal deception. It's a
Correct.
subset of verbal
That's
deception
right.
for you.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I'd be interested to a proposal for what lying would constitute then, and then I would want to cross-examine it in terms of could I do the same thing with my finger or my eyes or my
Right.
shoulders or
Right.
anything else? What's so
Right.
special about my tongue that
Right.
makes use of it impermissible? And here's
Right.
where I think the classic Thomistic analysis goes wrong. Our tongue is not single function, as even Thomists will acknowledge. It's not just for communication.
Correct.
It's also for other things like tasting and even
Right.
to a limited extent manipulating things.
Mm.
Sometimes we got to manipulate objects with our tongue.
Mm.
Well, in that respect, it's like our hands. Our hands are, while they have a primary sense associated with them,
Mm.
which is touch, whereas taste is the primary sense associated with our tongues, they're actually multifunction. And so you can't just look at the hands and say, oh, well, these aren't for doing damage to someone. No, doing damage to someone in a fallen world is part of what we can legitimately use them for. And I
Mhm.
would say doing doxastic damage with our tongue is also part of what can happen in a fallen world legitimately, just like using my eyes or my fingers to do doxastic damage to someone. So I
Right.
don't see anything special about the tongue compared to other bodily organs that would
Right.
prevent verbal deception, that would
So wouldn't
prevent
it just
verbal deception specifically.
Yeah, so it wouldn't even just be deception, right? Because we're both on my account, right? Whether it's wrong or right, but just assume
Mhm.
my account is right for the moment.
Yeah.
On my account, it's not just deception, but as you mentioned, a certain species or subset of deception, right? And so your body parts could be utilized for deception. That's fine, but the idea is that those other body parts can't fulfill that subspecies or that subset of deception in which the tongue can. So that would be the difference. Now, of course, you might say, okay, well, tell me what the definition of lying is so we can figure this
Yes.
out. In which
Yeah.
case, I've never claimed to know a good definition of lying, and I've the whole
Mhm.
time of this interview, I've said there have lots of questions about intentions. The whole debate on intentionalism, narrow versus broad intentions, and in reference to if you can lie as an indirect way somehow. So let's keep figuring this out. But nonetheless, I still think we can kind of um, um, narrow
Agree to
down the
disagree?
list
Mhm.
about what options are live and what other options aren't. So
Okay. Well, I don't want to keep pressing you on this. I think that the real issue is deception. And I think deception can be used in some, not all circumstances. And there are some forms of deception that are intrinsically evil and can never be done.
right. Agreed. Agreed on all
But
those.
yeah, but I don't think, in my view, that there's anything special about the tongue as opposed to other body parts that would prohibit it from being able to use deception in a way that other body parts can.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'd be curious if you're ever able to provide what you think is a sufficient
Yeah.
definition of lying. I'd love to hear it, but I don't want to keep pressing you on that subject. I suspect we're also not quite up to the 2 hour mark, but this is live stream's been
Yeah,
going
we're
on for a
getting
while,
there.
so I don't, so I would be happy agreeing to disagree
Yeah,
at
of
this
course.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. I think
Mhm.
that's good stuff to think about and talk through. Um, um,
Let's try to come back to the question that I kind of started us off at, Tyler. Before we were talking about the Sibylline
let,
oracles and how
let me
Christian.
just say like one thing super quick. I promise it'll be really quick.
Cool.
And that's just one might not be able to define certain things, but they can recognize it when it's there. So like famously,
Yes,
right?
Justice Stewart.
You might not be able to define pornography. I give a good jointly necessary and sufficient condition account of
Mhm.
pornography, but you can recognize whenever you see it, right? So anyway, I just
Yeah.
wanted to throw
That,
that out there.
that, that was Justice Potter Stewart, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Oh, and the
Yeah,
king I
what is it?
mentioned earlier was King Croesus of Lydia.
I was gonna say, isn't that the particularism? What's the other one? Methodism debate. Isn't that what
In
you're bringing up, Tyler?
epistemology, And an epistemology particularism basically just says here are some obvious examples of in epistemology at least of what of cases that we clearly know, and so we're going to judge
Yes.
epistemic theories based on that, versus Methodism, which says let's come up with a method of how we know an epistemology, how we know, and then we'll actually discount cases of knowledge even if they seem intuitive. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, one just random question. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. Tyler, have you ever met Alexander Proust?
Yes. Yeah. We've
You've
actually
been to
co-authored
conferences and stuff.
Yeah, we've been on panels.
When did you co-author a paper? How did I not know this?
Yeah, so recently, the American Catholic Philosophical Quarterly issue, Proust and I debate my colleague Brian Bisong about animals and if they go to heaven. So we've got our initial paper and a response.
Are you pro animals in heaven or anti animals in heaven?
I'm optimistic. So we're Proust and I were on the optimistic side.
Cool. I am too. I also I have a whole episode of Mysterious World about animal afterlife, including surprising veridical evidence for animals in heaven.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
All right, so turning back now to the topic, we'll end things on this, Tyler, after I get your thoughts on this. So where Jimmy and I were when you came in, where we were talking about these Sibyllene oracles and how Christians kind of use, like, and I think that we would put it under the category, like, even aside from questions of, like, were they actually lying or not, nevertheless, I think they were using deception here, because if they knew that if they knew that they changed the stories and then they were bringing these oracles to the pagans and being like, hey, look, it mentions Jesus, like maybe you guys should get on board with Christianity, like that nevertheless seems somewhat deceptive. So then the question, maybe we could turn it this way: could a Christian use deceit to get someone to embrace Christ? Would that ever be morally justified, or could it ever be morally justified?
That's a really good question, and Jimmy might disagree with me on this, but I think that recently Pope Francis has emphasized, and sometimes it trips people up when he makes this emphasis on the distinction between proselytizing and evangelizing. And so proselytization, and usually people just in everyday language outside of the church will just use it to mean like basically the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to convince someone to join your view or your religion or whatever. But proselytization is how Pope Francis understands it, is like where you're using kind of illicit means to try to get someone to join your church or your position. And so that includes deception. It includes where you're putting undue pressure on them, almost kind of coercing their will. It includes a lot of different things. And so, given his continual teaching on drawing this distinction, I would say no, it wouldn't be permissible to. That would be an example of proselytization rather than genuine evangelism.
I would agree 100% with that, and not in particular because of what Pope Francis has said, but because my theory would classify deceptions regarding God as intrinsically evil, and therefore you can't lie in order to get someone to embrace God.
Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and end things there and wrap things up. But Tyler, again, I apologize. It was actually my fault for for messing up the time. But I'm glad that you were able to join nevertheless. And I think the conversation was very fruitful, and I was even talking in the live chat about how this was one of my favorite conversations we'd actually had on the channel in recent memory. So yeah, this was a lot of fun. We gotta definitely do more stuff together.
I think we make a good trio, and we've done like a lot of videos now, I think, together. So keep them going.
Awesome. All right, well, Jimmy, Tyler, thanks for joining, and we'll see you guys in the next Capturing Christianity video. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?